How long could silence last before it became a solid thing, pressing in from the whitewashed walls, thickening the already heavy Andalusian air? Isabella Valverde, mistress of the Cortijo de las Sombras, felt she knew. 2 years since Don Rafael had breathed his last in the cavernous master bedroom, 2 years entombed in black silk and unspoken grief, and the silence had become her most constant companion. It hummed beneath the drone of cicadas baking in the relentless sun, echoed in the cavernous halls where her footsteps were swallowed by cool terracotta tiles, settled like dust on the heavy, dark furniture. She was 22, a widow, the custodian of olive groves and vineyards that stretched further than her eye could comfortably see. Yet her world had shrunk to these walls, this prescribed mourning, this echoing quiet. From the tall, barred window of the main salon, shielded from the worst of the afternoon glare by heavy wooden shutters angled just so, she watched the courtyard shimmer in the heat. Below, life went on, dictated by the sun and the seasons. Men worked, their movements economical under the punishing sky. Among them, Mateo Cortez. He was perhaps 20, his body lean and hard from labor, skin bronzed to the color of burnt earth. He moved with a contained energy that seemed an affront to the languid despair that permeated the house. Today, stripped to the waist as he repaired a section of the stable wall, the muscles in his back rippled with each swing of the hammer, sweat glistening on his skin. Isabella's gaze lingered, unwillingly drawn to the raw vitality he represented. A jolt, sharp and unwelcome, went through her. She turned away quickly, her hand flying to the jet rosary at her waist, fingers fumbling for the cool beads. Such thoughts were a sin, a betrayal of Raphael's memory, of the dignity expected of her. Her life was a map drawn by others. Prayers at dawn, overseeing the household accounts with the ever-present Dolores Nunez, the housekeeper whose loyalty felt more like surveillance, a solitary meal, needlework, vespers, sleep. Dolores, severe in her own perpetual black, moved through the house like a shadow herself, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She had served Don Rafael for decades, and her presence now was both a comfort and a cage, ensuring Isabella adhered to every stricture of widowhood. "A widow's grief must be worn with dignity, Signora," she'd say, her voice dry as dust, whenever Isabella seemed too lost in thought, or her gaze strayed too long towards the world outside the gates. Dignity felt like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. Isabella longed for something, anything, to break the monotony, the crushing weight of propriety. Current part characters 2988, total characters 2988. One stifling afternoon, seeking refuge from the oppressive heat that even the thick stone walls couldn't fully repel, Isabella found herself near the shaded archway leading to the workers' quarters during the siesta hour. Voices drifted on the still air, rough male laughter, fragments of conversation not meant for her ears. Like a ripe fig bursting. One voice slurred, followed by coarser appreciations of some village woman. Then another voice, lower, boastful. "An old bull ploughs no furrow, eh? Needs young blood." They weren't talking about her, she knew, yet the words, crude and visceral, landed like stones in the placid pool of her thoughts. Young blood. The image of Mateo's sweat-slicked back flashed in her mind, unbidden. Heat rose in her cheeks, a mortifying blush that had nothing to do with the sun. She retreated quickly, her heart pounding, the rosary beads clicking frantically in her grasp. That night, sleep offered no escape. She dreamt of running barefoot through the olive groves, the earth cool beneath her feet, pursued by a faceless shadow that somehow held the promise of both terror and release. The next day, a strange restlessness propelled her. She found reasons to be near the courtyard, instructing a maid about polishing the brass, inspecting a cracked flagstone. Always her eyes would find Mateo. He seemed aware of her presence, though he never stared directly. But sometimes as he passed, carrying tools or leading a mule, his dark, intense gaze would meet hers for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. It was like a spark in the tinder-dry atmosphere of the Cortijo, leaving her breathless and unnerved. He began to appear in places she frequented, repairing a loose shutter near the salon window just as she sat down with her embroidery. Clearing weeds from the small, neglected fountain garden she sometimes walked in, his head bowed respectfully, yet she felt his awareness of her like a physical touch. Once, walking near the stables, The small locket containing a miniature of her late husband slipped from the chain around her neck, falling into the thick dust near a water trough. Before she could even react, Matteo, who had been mending harnesses nearby, moved with startling speed. He retrieved it, brushing the dust away with surprising gentleness before holding it out to her. His calloused fingers brushed hers as she took it. A shock, electric and undeniable, passed between them. His eyes, dark and unreadable, held hers. "Signora," he murmured, his voice low. Isabella snatched her hand back as if burned, murmuring a thank you, her voice barely a whisper. She fled back to the cool dimness of the house, her pulse racing. Dolores was waiting in the hall, polishing silver, her expression unreadable, but her presence a silent rebuke. "The sun is strong today, Signora. It is best to remain indoors." Isabella nodded mutely, the feel of Matteo's rough skin still imprinted on her fingertips. The internal battle raged. Days were spent in fervent prayer, nights in restless tossing. Isabella tried to focus on Raphael's memory, on her duties, on the endless litany of saints, but the image of Matteo persisted. The strength in his arms, the intensity in his eyes, the heat she imagined radiating from his skin. He represented life, raw and untamed, everything her existence currently lacked. Was this God's test, a punishment for some unknown sin? Or was it simply the cry of a young body, a lonely heart, starved for connection? She began reading passages from a dusty volume of poetry she'd found hidden in Raphael's study, verses about forbidden love and burning passion that seemed to speak directly to the turmoil within her. The words were both a solace and a torment, feeding the flame she desperately tried to extinguish with prayer and penance. Matteo, meanwhile, watched and waited. He saw the flicker in her eyes when he was near, the sudden blush, the restless hands. He saw her loneliness, her fragility beneath the stiff armor of widowhood. His desire for her, initially a spark of physical attraction mixed with resentment of her unattainable status, had grown into a consuming fire. She was the signora, the owner of the land he worked, as distant as the moon. Yet he sensed a crack in her composure, a vulnerability he could exploit. His actions became bolder, though still subtle. A wildflower, a deep crimson poppy he'd seen her admire once, left on the stone bench in the fountain garden. Offering to carry a heavy basket she struggled with, allowing their arms to brush. Always respectful, always deferential, but his eyes spoke a different language, a silent promise of something more. He knew Dolores watched him too, her disapproval a palpable force. He played the part of the diligent, slightly dull-witted farmhand whenever she was near, lowering his gaze, mumbling responses. But his mind was sharp, calculating the risks, waiting for the right moment. He saw Isabella not just as an object of desire, but as a path, perhaps, out of the grinding poverty that defined his existence. Possessing her would be the ultimate transgression, the ultimate victory over the class barrier that suffocated him. One sweltering afternoon, Isabella was overseeing the storage of harvested olives in a cool, dim storeroom off the main courtyard. Matteo was among the men hauling the heavy sacks. As he passed her, closer than necessary in the narrow space, he stumbled slightly, his arm bracing against the wall just beside her head. She was trapped for a moment, his body heat radiating towards her, the scent of his sweat and the dusty olives filling her senses. His face was inches from hers, his breathing audible. "Pardon, Signora," he breathed, his eyes locking with hers. The air crackled. Footsteps echoed in the courtyard. Dolores. Matteo straightened instantly, grabbing another sack and moving away, leaving Isabella leaning against the cool stone wall, trembling, her carefully constructed composure shattered. Dolores appeared at the doorway, her gaze sweeping the room, lingering for a moment on Isabella's flushed face before moving to Matteo's retreating back. "Is everything in order, Signora?" she asked, her tone clipped. "Si, Dolores. Everything is fine," Isabella managed, her voice unsteady. The housekeeper said nothing more, but her silence was heavy with suspicion. Current part characters, 36 and 77. Total characters, 977. The tension became unbearable. Isabella felt stretched taut, like a bowstring about to snap. The heatwave continued, relentless, baking the earth and fraying nerves. Even the nights offered little respite, the air thick and still. Dolores seemed omnipresent, her vigilance doubling. Isabella felt trapped, suffocating not just in her mourning clothes, but in her own skin. She began to avoid the courtyard, taking her meals in her room, pleading headaches. Yet the confinement only amplified her internal turmoil. One afternoon, the sky, which had been a merciless blue for weeks, turned a bruised purple. A strange stillness fell over the cortijo, the cicadas falling silent. Then the wind rose, whipping dust through the courtyard, rattling the shutters. Thunder growled in the distance, low and menacing. Dolores, ever practical, began securing the main house, ordering servants to latch windows and bring in anything loose. "A summer storm, Signora," she announced, bustling past Isabella. "A bad one, by the looks of it." Isabella felt a strange mix of apprehension and exhilaration. The impending violence of the storm seemed to mirror the tempest inside her. She remembered seeing Matteo heading towards the old, partially ruined chapel at the far end of the olive groves earlier, tasked with checking the roof for loose tiles before the rains came. A sudden, reckless impulse seized her. Claiming she needed to ensure the chapel relics were protected, she ignored Dolores's sharp protest. "The men will see to it, Signora. It is not safe," and slipped out through a side door, pulling her shawl tighter against the rising wind. The walk through the groves was treacherous. Wind tore at her skirts, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, cold and sharp. The air was electric. By the time she reached the crumbling chapel, the storm had broken in earnest. Rain lashed down, turning the dusty path to mud. Thunder cracked overhead, startlingly close. She pushed open the heavy wooden door and stumbled inside, gasping for breath, her hair plastered to her face. Matteo was there, sheltering just inside the doorway. He turned, startled, his eyes wide in the gloom. Rainwater streamed from his hair and plastered his simple shirt to his chest. They stared at each other, the roar of the storm outside filling the sudden silence between them. The air inside the small stone structure felt thick, charged. Water dripped from the dilapidated roof, pooling on the stone floor. "Signora?" Matteo's voice was rough, uncertain. Isabella couldn't speak. She leaned against the cold stone wall, trying to catch her breath, acutely aware of his presence, of their isolation. The storm raged, effectively cutting them off from the rest of the world. He took a step towards her. "You should not be out in this, Signora. It is dangerous." Another step. He was close now, close enough for her to smell the rain on his skin, the earth clinging to his clothes. He reached out, his rough hand hovering near her arm as if to steady her. "Are you all right?" His touch, when it came, was tentative, yet it sent a jolt through her entire body. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else, something wilder that the storm seemed to have unleashed within her. The carefully constructed walls of propriety, guilt, and fear crumbled. He saw it in her eyes, the surrender, the raw need that mirrored his own. His hand moved from her arm to her face, thumb gently brushing a stray, rain-soaked strand of hair from her cheek. It was a gesture of unexpected tenderness, yet charged with an underlying assertion. Isabella trembled but didn't pull away. Her breath hitched. His other hand found her waist, pulling her slightly towards him. The world narrowed to the small damp space, the roar of the storm, the thunder echoing the frantic pounding of her own heart. His face lowered to hers. His lips, rough and demanding, found hers. It wasn't gentle, not the chaste, dutiful kiss of her marriage. It was a desperate claiming, a release of pent-up hunger, his and hers. Shock warred with a dizzying wave of sensation she had never known. She gasped, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders. Whether to push him away or pull him closer, she didn't know. He deepened the kiss, his arm tightening around her waist, pressing her against the hard planes of his body. She could feel the strength of him, the heat of him, even through their damp clothes. The scent of rain and earth and male sweat filled her senses. Years of loneliness, of suppressed desire, of stifling conformity, erupted within her. She kissed him back, tentatively at first, then with a desperate fervour that surprised them both. "Sorry, but I can't assist with that." The storm raged outside, mirroring the tempest that consumed them. In the dim, flickering light filtering through the chapel's narrow windows, amidst the scent of damp stone and decay, they clung together, two souls breaking every rule, finding a desperate, dangerous solace in each other's arms. The act itself was clumsy, urgent, driven by overwhelming need rather than tenderness. It was a transgression, a fall from grace, yet in that moment, pressed against the cold stone, enveloped by the storm and Matteo's heat, Isabella felt terrifyingly, undeniably alive for the first time in years. As the storm's fury began to subside, replaced by the steady drumming of rain on the roof, the intensity of the moment receded, leaving behind a chilling awareness of what they had done. Isabella pulled away, trembling violently, hastily trying to rearrange her dishevelled clothing, her fingers fumbling with buttons. Shame washed over her, cold and sickening. She couldn't meet Matteo's eyes. He stood watching her, his expression unreadable in the gloom, his chest rising and falling rapidly. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the magnitude of their shared sin. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the dripping water and the distant rumble of retreating thunder. Finally, Isabella spoke, her voice a ragged whisper. This never happened." Matteo nodded slowly, his gaze finally meeting hers. There was a new confidence in his eyes, a subtle shift in the power dynamic that hadn't been there before. "As you wish, Signora." The formality of the address felt like a mockery now. "You must go," she said, turning away, unable to bear his scrutiny, "before anyone sees." He hesitated for a moment, then moved silently towards the door, pausing only to cast one last lingering look back at her huddled figure against the wall. Then he was gone, disappearing into the rain-washed landscape. Isabella remained frozen for a long time, the cold of the stone seeping into her bones. When she finally forced herself to move, her limbs felt heavy, alien. She smoothed her dress, pinned up her hair with trembling fingers, trying to erase any sign of the storm, internal and external. The walk back to the cortijo felt impossibly long. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow seemed accusatory. Dolores met her in the entrance hall, her face a mask of disapproval. "The storm has passed, Signora. You are soaked through. You will catch your death." There was an edge to her voice, a knowing glint in her eyes that made Isabella's blood run cold. Had she seen Matteo returning? Did she suspect? "I was delayed," Isabella stammered, avoiding the housekeeper's gaze. "The chapel roof needs significant repair." She fled up the stairs to the sanctuary of her room, locking the door behind her. She scrubbed her skin raw in the basin, trying to wash away the feel of Matteo's hands, the scent of him, the memory of her own abandon. But the stain was deeper than skin. It was etched onto her soul. Kneeling before the small crucifix on her wall, she tried to pray, but the words felt hollow, hypocritical. The guilt was a physical weight, crushing her. Yet, beneath it, a confusing, treacherous current of something else lingered. A flicker of warmth, a memory of intense sensation, the echo of feeling truly, dangerously alive. Life at the cortijo settled back into its somnolent rhythm, but everything had changed. Outwardly, Isabella maintained her composure, resuming her duties, her prayers, her suffocating black attire. But inwardly she was a landscape irrevocably altered. The memory of the storm, of Matteo's touch, was a constant presence, a secret fire burning beneath the placid surface. She avoided him, planning her movements carefully to ensure their paths didn't cross. When encounters were unavoidable, supervising work in the fields from a distance, giving instructions through Dolores, she kept her gaze averted, her voice clipped and formal. Matteo, too, played his part. He was the respectful, diligent farmhand. Yet Isabella felt his eyes on her sometimes, a possessive heat that made her skin prickle. He seemed content to wait, letting the memory of their encounter work on her. He knew, perhaps better than she did herself, the depth of the loneliness he had breached. Dolores remained a constant, watchful presence. She said nothing overt, but her scrutiny intensified. She seemed to materialize whenever Isabella lingered too long near a window overlooking the workers, her sharp questions about household matters designed to pull Isabella's attention back within the prescribed boundaries. The housekeeper's silence was more unnerving than accusations. It hinted at suspicions held in check, waiting for confirmation. The tension in the house was palpable, a low hum beneath the surface of daily routine. Weeks passed. The initial shock and shame began to war with a persistent, gnawing ache of loneliness, now amplified by the memory of connection, however forbidden. The nights were the worst. Sleep offered little escape, often filled with fragmented dreams of the storm, of rough hands and urgent kisses, leaving her shaken and guilt-ridden, yet yearning. The prayers felt increasingly futile, the penance inadequate. The stark reality of her future stretched before her, endless years of quiet dignity, of sterile widowhood, haunted by the ghost of a passion she had tasted only once. One evening, unable to bear the confines of her room, she walked in the moonlit fountain garden. The air was cooler now, scented with night-blooming jasmine. She sat on the stone bench, lost in thought. A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness beneath the cypress trees. Matteo, her heart leaped into her throat. He approached slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. "Signora," he said softly. Isabella stood abruptly. "What do you want, Matteo?" Her voice was sharp with fear and a confusing flicker of anticipation. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he gestured towards the bench. Tucked partially under the stone was a single, perfect, deep crimson poppy. The same kind he had left before. A silent offering. A reminder. He held her gaze for a long moment, his expression intense, questioning. Then, without another word, he melted back into the shadows. Isabella stared at the poppy, her heart pounding. It felt like a challenge, a temptation. She stood frozen for a long time, the moonlight silvering her pale face, her internal battle raging anew. Finally, with a trembling hand, she reached down and picked up the flower, its petals soft as velvet against her skin. She crushed it in her fist, the colour staining her palm like blood, before fleeing back to the house, the scent of jasmine suddenly cloying, suffocating. The gesture, however, had done its work. The fragile piece Isabella had tried to reconstruct was shattered. The memory, the yearning, returned with renewed force. She found herself watching Matteo again, no longer trying to avoid his presence entirely. She saw the way the sun caught the dark curls of his hair, the easy strength in his movements, the defiant set of his jaw when he thought no one was looking. He was everything her life was not. Grounded, physical, perhaps dangerous, but undeniably real. The secret knowledge lay between them, a taut wire humming with unspoken energy. Sometimes their eyes would meet across the courtyard, and a jolt of awareness would pass between them, sharp and illicit. Matteo seemed to understand the shift in her. He didn't press, didn't risk another overt gesture, but his presence became more deliberate. He found reasons to be near the main house, fixing a hinge on the courtyard gate, tending the roses beneath her window, always silent, always working, yet always there. Isabella's existence became a tightrope walk between suffocating propriety and the gravitational pull of her forbidden desire. Guilt was her constant companion, whispering during prayers, shadowing her steps. But loneliness was a more powerful force. The memory of Matteo's touch, of feeling seen, wanted, even in that desperate, degrading way, was a potent antidote to the crushing invisibility of her widowhood. One hot, still siesta hour, when the cortijo lay dormant under the midday sun, and even Dolores had retreated to the cool dimness of her own quarters, Isabella found herself drawn to the stables. The air inside was cooler, smelling of hay and horses. Matteo was there, checking on a lame mare. He looked up as she entered, surprise flickering in his eyes before settling into watchful stillness. She murmured something about the mare, her voice unsteady. He answered respectfully, his explanation concise. But the air was thick with unspoken things. The silence stretched, filled only by the soft sounds of the horse shifting its weight, the buzzing of flies near the door. Isabella's gaze fell on Matteo's hands as he gently examined the horse's leg, strong, calloused, the same hands that had touched her with such urgency in the chapel. She felt dizzy, the heat and the sudden proximity overwhelming her. She swayed slightly, putting a hand out to steady herself against a wooden post. Matteo moved instantly, his arm going around her waist to support her. "Signora, are you unwell?" His touch ignited the embers of memory. She looked up at him, her eyes dark with turmoil. He held her gaze, his own intense, searching. In that moment, the careful facade crumbled again. Need, raw and undeniable, asked between them. He didn't need to speak. He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their second encounter was different from the first. Less frantic, less desperate, imbued with a terrifying tenderness that was almost more undoing than the raw urgency of the storm. In the hay-scented dimness of the stable, hidden from the judging eyes of the world, they sought solace in each other again, driven by a loneliness that transcended class and propriety. This time, when he pulled away, there was a shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the dangerous path they had chosen. He helped her smooth her dress, his touch lingering perhaps a moment too long. "Be careful, Signora," he whispered, his eyes scanning the sunlit doorway. "Dolores." She nodded, unable to speak, and slipped away, her heart pounding a rhythm of fear and exhilaration. Thus began their secret life. It was a precarious existence, lived in stolen moments, furtive glances, and coded signals. A door left slightly ajar at night, a task requested in a secluded part of the estate. A shared look across a crowded courtyard that spoke volumes. Each encounter was fraught with the terrifying risk of discovery. Dolores's watchful eyes seemed sharper than ever, her presence a constant, low-level threat. Isabella learned to school her features, to feign indifference, while her inner world churned with a volatile mix of guilt, desire, and fear. Matteo grew bolder in his subtle possession. He no longer seemed merely the opportunistic farmhand. There was a possessiveness in his gaze now, a confidence in his bearing when they were alone that blurred the lines of mistress and servant. He brought her small things, a perfectly ripe fig, a bird's feather, placed where only she would find them, tokens of their secret world. Isabella accepted them, her guilt warring with a treacherous sense of being cherished, however illicitly. Was it love? She dared not name it. It was need, loneliness, a dangerous addiction that filled the echoing void in her life. For Matteo, it was a complex victory. The thrill of transgression, the possession of the unattainable, perhaps even a warped kind of affection born from shared secrecy and intense physical connection. The seasons turned. The olive harvest came and went. Winter brought a chill to the air, but the secret fire between Isabella and Matteo burned hotter, fueled by the constant danger. Dolores remained the silent sentinel, her suspicions likely solidifying, though she lacked proof. She made Isabella's life subtly more difficult, increasing her demands, emphasizing religious observations, arranging visits from the stern village priest whose questions about Isabella's spiritual well-being felt pointedly intrusive.